So, morning to anyone on catch up as well. I'm continuing my series on When in Rome and just thinking about what it means to be a community filled with His Spirit, filled with the life of God and bringing in the kingdom. And that is a radical community which is very different to the culture and the world that we see around us. And, sometimes we say it's easier said than done, don't we, about things. And that's true of a lot of things. Whether it's losing weight, we think, I'll lose some weight. That's a lot easier to say than actually do it. Or I'll get fit. Or I'll keep my office tidy. That's certainly easier said than done. Certainly for some, anyway. Or I'm going to make sure I read my emails on time and read them properly. Well, easier said than done. And I guess you could say that being this loving community that Paul is outlining and describing in Romans 12 is also easier said than done. And certainly that's true of what this next section we're going to look at this morning. I've called it radical love, because I think that's what it is. It is radical. It's a radical way of living. And very much, as I said, against the prevailing flow of our world. And what the world tells us is the way to live. So we're going to look at that now. So it's moving on from the last bit we had last week about hospitality and looking after each other. Paul goes on to say, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited. So he starts by talking about blessing our enemies or blessing those that persecute us. And I can't help thinking that when Paul's writing this, he's got Jesus' own teaching from the Sermon on the Mount in his mind. This is recording the bit from Luke. Jesus says, but to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you and pray for those who mistreat you. Now, Paul mentions particularly those who persecute us. Now, in Rome, in the city of Rome, for this enclave of the kingdom of God, in the very early years of the church, persecution was a very real thing. It wasn't something that was just sort of maybe it might happen, or it was a reality, a daily reality for them. And yet he says to this little church in Rome, I want you to bless them. When people persecute you in whatever way that might be, it might be shunning them in business, it might be imprisoning them, it might even be martyrdom. He says, whenever that happens, in whatever context that happens, he says, I want you to bless them. When those people are coming for you, I want you to bless them and not curse them. Now, how radical is that? That's the most radical kind of love that there is. Now, for us, at the moment, we don't face that much persecution, not in terms of institutionalised persecution, but the church it's no doubt the church is becoming more marginalised. As Christians, I think the world hates us a bit more than it did 10 or 20 years ago. As Christians, we have less and less influence and are seen as more and more strange and dangerous, probably, by the world around us. And maybe some Christians are dangerous, but I do think we face a lot of what we might call cognitive persecution. In other words, the way that we think is now being attacked more and more because of our faith. So we will face that. We will face people who are very much anti us, maybe neighbours or work colleagues or whatever. And Paul says that when that happens, I want you to bless those that are doing that. And I guess we can include those that oppose us or harm us or hurt us or are against us. And our natural reaction, of course, is that when somebody hurts us or is trying to give us harm in whatever way that might be, our natural reaction, of course, is to fight back and to curse, as Paul puts it in this passage in Romans. Jesus way is different. The Jesus way, as we saw in his own life, when he was persecuted and when he was arrested, he refused to curse people, he refused to lash out, he refused to use his power in any harmful way to them. And he kept praying for them, even on the cross, praying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So, we know our own hearts, I know mine, and very often when somebody harms me, I want to get my own back. But I know deep down that's just the devil's way, that's the world's way. And it just is a way that escalates everything that is harmful and bad. So I want the Spirit's power and strength to be able to this is an active thing. He talks about blessing, and I think blessing is about praying for those that hurt us. But I think it's also about doing active things of good for them. It's finding ways that we can actually serve them. It's not always possible to do that, but if we can, if there's some way in which we can actually turn all of that around and actually do some active way of loving them, and whether it's just giving them something, helping them in some way. It's great if your neighbour's against you, just to do something kind to them and for them, because it just changes the whole atmosphere of how things are. So that's the first radical bit of love, and that is really radical. Secondly, he says about rejoicing and mourning with others. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. It's entering into the highs and lows of those around us, and that again is a very difficult thing to do. Understanding the inner world of someone and entering into the inner world of someone, it's not something we can ever fully do in some ways, but that's what Paul is getting at. To have that empathy with what somebody else is going through and experiencing. Now, I don't know for you which is harder, to rejoice with those who rejoice or to mourn with those who mourn. And I guess it depends on what somebody else is rejoicing about, really. And often that can be the hardest test for us as Christians, when somebody else seems to be blessed with the one thing that we've been really looking for. Whether it's recognition in some way within the church, or whether it's with your work colleagues, somebody else gets the promotion, or whether it's somebody else gets healed of the very thing that you want to be healed for. Or somebody else experiences something that you've really been longing and desiring for and wanting for yourself. The test is in those circumstances. Can you still rejoice with them? Can you really, in your heart of hearts, say, I'm so pleased for you, I'm so pleased, and rejoice with them? And on the other flip side of it, when somebody is struggling, going through loss or sadness, a low, can you empathise with that? It's hard to do that when you're self-centred. You have to enter into their world and experience it. And Paul's encouraging us to do that. And we can only do that, I think, really by both the highs and lows. It's by, even if we can't exactly identify with their circumstance, we know we've all had highs and lows in our own lives. And it's by using those feelings, how we felt in that situation, that we can then empathise with those around us who are struggling or having great success in some way. And I guess that's in some ways I find these situations a gauge to my own love. If I find myself thinking, why did they get that and I didn't? Or, why can't they just pull themselves together? If I'm feeling that, then it's a gauge, there's something wrong in my heart, and I need the compassion that the Spirit brings. So, doing this, rejoicing with those who rejoice, mourning with those who mourn, entering into the struggles and the difficulties, all of that is a hard thing for us to do, because we are by nature, inward looking. But the radical change of the kingdom is that we cease to be that. We cease to be inward looking, and we start being outward looking and start being able to identify with others. So Paul goes on. Thirdly, he says, live in harmony with one another. It literally means being of one mind. And as we have renewed minds, although we're very different personalities, all of us, different experiences of life and so on, the one thing that should be overriding in our mind is that we are kingdom orientated and we love Jesus and we want to serve him. And that's what brings us together, and that's what overcomes the difficulties. And I love the way that Paul uses this idea of harmony, and it naturally makes me think of music and the wonderful harmony that you have from people coming together in a big group, particularly whether it's an orchestra or a choir. And it's the sum of the total as people work together and bring their different range of voices or different instruments together to create this whole beautiful sound. And it is, if you've ever, I'm sure many of you have experienced it, either a great choir or an orchestra, and just the power and beauty that together this whole group can bring. And that's the kind of idea of harmony that I think Paul has in mind. And what he's saying to us is that he wants each one of us to add to the richness and beauty of the total as we work together. And we can only do that by doing that, working together, adjusting ourselves to those around us. For an orchestra to work, it's no good if one of the violinists decides he's going to play something completely different and do his own thing. You get discordance, won't you? And I guess sometimes we might have heard that with choirs and singers when somebody suddenly sings out of key and it sounds rather horrible. So we can't do our own thing. We have to work within the framework of the group, of the people of the church, and we harmonise and we bring our own strengths and make this whole beautiful thing happen. Now, the question I suppose from that is, are you a harmoniser or are you a discorder? And there are some people who, even in Christian fellowships, who love to cause a bit of trouble and just become discorders. They like to stir things up and create a bad note, if you like, or a sharp note. I trust it's none of you, but it's worth asking a question. When I'm going around, do I create disharmony? Do I upset people? Or am I willing to put aside my own preferences in order to create harmony and to make this whole thing work? There's not much harmony around in our world. It's becoming more and more factionalised, more and more tribalised. And we can bring something unique as a church. And this is key because the enemy always wants to break up churches. He wants to bring in needles and little discords and disruptions and so on between us. So be aware of it, because he's always at work trying to create people at loggerheads with one another, pulling in different directions, having different visions, and not pulling together. It's a beautiful, unique thing of the church that we can reveal to the world the harmony that can come only through the kingdom of God coming into our hearts and minds. Then Paul says, don't be proud. And he says, be willing to associate with those of low position. Pride is such an ugly thing, really, and yet we can all be so easily susceptible to it. We can always so easily look down on other people, whether it's because of their economic situation or we think we're better than them intellectually, or we think we're more gifted, or we think we're more empowered by God, and we look down on those of different cultures. It's so easy to do that. So easy for all of us to do that. Now this bit about associated with people of low position. There's a note in the NIV, because translators are not quite sure whether that's the translation or it means be willing to do menial work. So let's shove both of those in. Be willing to do the least attractive task. It's that sense of, I'm too gifted to do that, Yeah. You're great, actually. I don't sense this is a problem in our church, but it can be. And, if we ever, I just thought if we ever get a building, if we ever have our own building, then I want there to be a queue to clean the toilets, just saying.
Lead by example.
Yeah. I'd have to be on the road, so I know. Yeah. But yeah, it's just that sense of, I'll do whatever it takes. The least thing, the thing that's not noticed, the thing that's behind the scenes, or the thing that, would appear to be the lowest thing. It's Jesus washing the disciples' feet, isn't it? And that meal they had together when it was dusty, and none of them, because that was the lowest of the low thing to do, and none of the other disciples were willing to do it. It was only Jesus who was willing to do it. But that's the heart we need to have, not to be proud, but to be willing to do whatever it takes within the church and within one another. So, and lastly, he says, don't be conceited. And I think that's talking about thinking that you know it all and you know better. That's not a posture that's good in the kingdom of God. We are lifelong learners, and we need to be continually open to correction, to learning new things, to doing things differently. We can tend to sort of just get into the position where we do things and do life in the same way, somehow expecting different results sometimes. But one said the definition of foolishness is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. And often we just have to do something different. We have to learn something different. So it's about that lifelong learning posture, and not thinking that we're better or more gifted than those around us. So those 5 things are radical things to do. To pray for those and bless those who persecute us. To mourn and rejoice with those who are going through things. To live in harmony. Not to be proud or conceited. And I guess the thing is, how do those things are easier said than done, as I said at the start. So how do we do that? Oh, that's part of that. How do we live this out? At the beginning of Romans 12, which we didn't look at, you'll know it begins with these famous words. He says, in view of what I've been talking about, all the theology of the first 11 chapters, he says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. And then he goes, this is how you should live. So this is still responding to that. In view of God's mercy, this is how you should live. And I think that's key to living all of this out. It's having God's mercy in view and keeping God's mercy in view. And actually once we lose sight of the mercy of God, we're in trouble. And it's very difficult to live out the kingdom of God. So having God's mercy in view means that we know and we're always conscious of our own hopeless situation without Christ and without the cross, without the gospel. We are actually in a hopeless situation. And I need constantly to be reminded of my own hopelessness without him. And it's that helps me then to ask for the Spirit's help to bless those who persecute me, live in harmony, all the rest of it. It's because I've got God's mercy in view. Got 2 there. Our loving acceptance. Remembering God's mercy reminds me that I'm accepted by God. And I'm actually highly esteemed by God. He views me so highly, and you and all of us. And that makes a huge difference to the way that I live my life. When I have God's mercy in how he now views me in my mind, then I'm able to give grace and mercy to others. And when I have my identity as his child and security knowing that my future is in his hands and in his loving hands, and I'm in his loving arms, no matter what happens, then I'm able to live with grace through the power of the Spirit. And when I remember, I didn't have this as a point, but when I remember that all I have is a gift, then I'm able to be gracious to others. You know, it's not, whatever we are able to do in God's power is all of his strength and all of his gifting. It's his grace. If I'm given understanding of something, you know, that's his Spirit that enables us to do that. All of it, all of who we are, all of who we've become is a gift, and it is grace. So it's in view of God's mercy. It's having God's mercy constantly in the forefront of our minds that enables us to live this radical way with radical love towards others, because we've received radical love ourselves. And then Paul goes on to say, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So what essentially Paul is saying in these points is, I want you to sacrifice for the sake of others. It's a laying down. It's a laying down again of who we are. So laying down our wounds and our pain and giving it to him rather than inflicting it on somebody else. It's a laying down of our hardness and our indifference and our longings so that we can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. It's a laying down of our preferences so that we can keep the harmony going in the church. It's a laying down of our egos so that we aren't proud and we aren't conceited. So this is what we bring to the table for Jesus' sake. This is what he did. He laid down his wounds. He laid down his indifference to the world and came to us. He laid down his preferences for the sake of the Father and for us. And he laid down aside his power and became weak for each one of us. So that's the call to us. It's this, and I do believe that now more than ever is the time when we need to rise up as a church to live the kingdom way. I know that I'm not living the kingdom way enough, and in the way that he wants me to, in terms of this radical love. But it's this that will bring transformation. You know, we were singing earlier about bringing revival and the Spirit breaking out. It will come as we live in this radical way. But I need to lay my life down to do that. I need to go through the pain sometimes of not having my way, of giving in to somebody else and loving someone through the pain and through the suffering in order that the kingdom will come. And then next time when we look at the next bit in Romans 12, which will probably be the last bit, it talks about overcoming evil with good. And that's what this is about. And we'll think about that a bit more next time, what it means to overcome evil with good.